So the interview is about business. She asked to interview entrepreneurs and talk. It's aimed at entrepreneurs. It doesn't have to be someone who's a business owner. And I actually think it's interesting angle to pick someone who's not a business owner, but might be a business leader, because most people don't have the opportunity to necessarily own their own business. So how do they be entrepreneurial in the job that they have was really the question that I think would be interesting to ask. The first one is, what was your greatest business success and what was your best learning opportunity in business?
What was the best business success?
Yeah.
Adapting early to the 340B program.
Really? Okay.
And
how so?
Becoming part of the UVM Medical Center network.
So when you say adapting to the program, in what way was that a business success?
Because it created an opportunity for us to be successful as an independent pharmacy in an area where chains had been putting pharmacies out of business, to become profitable and creative, to provide profit to the revenue to the institution and clinical services to the pharmacy.
And what would have happened if you hadn't adapted to the 340B program?
We would probably have been struggling financially, not had the growth of the staff that we had, and most likely have been taken over by one of the local chain pharmacies offering to do business within the organization.
So what's like from a practical perspective, what would that look like? You think we have what, 65 staff members now?
Mm-hmm.
And how many do you think we would have without this adaptation?
I think we would have around 12.
12?
We would need enough for managing the ACC, UHC, and the Fanny Allen campus, and the home infusion pharmacy. So at minimal hours.
We would probably have, I mean, if you compare and contrast our retail pharmacy operation like the ACC pharmacy to a chain, are there some differences between those that would be impossible to maintain if we didn't have 340B?
Yeah, I mean, our level of customer service and our patient to employee ratio and ratio of employees to number of prescriptions filled is way off base because of the services that we're able to provide.
Like we have more, for the number of prescriptions that we fill, we have more staff than most pharmacies would?
Right.
And more all staff or more pharmacists or more techs or both?
Both. We have compliance people, we have finance people, we have nurses. So most pharmacies don't have that ability.
What about in terms of scope of services? Would we be able to offer fewer services of different types?
Yeah,
I mean,
we have.
Retail pharmacies might still be open, but what about everything else?
I think that we have 6 clinical pharmacists embedded in clinics providing patient care, which we probably wouldn't have. We wouldn't be talking about the technology that we have. We wouldn't have the ability to potentially go to bedside discharge and mail order pharmacy and have the apps that we're hoping to put on our process, because those things are all very labor intensive and cost a lot of money in terms of getting that passed through the university.
So that really the scale and the scope of the business is sort of defined by this adaptation?
Yeah.
And how did that adaptation come about?
Well, it came about, the adaptation of 340B. It was made available through a law in 1992. And when we decided that it might pertain to us, we did a little bit of research to see if the disproportionate share of patients that we had at our hospital allowed us to participate in the program. And we barely made that cutoff initially and started the program very slowly with just our retail pharmacy, and then over the years have managed that to open a specialty pharmacy, a mail order pharmacy, include the home infusion pharmacy, and then the experience of expanding into contract pharmacy services.
So it was a gradual adaptation?
Yes.
But
if we wouldn't have seen that, we would have fallen behind and lost a lot of revenue and a lot of volume and not been able to provide the clinical services that we did. So we were actually ahead of the curve with other academic teaching hospitals at the same time, because at the same time we chose to do that, the majority of teaching hospitals and the outpatient pharmacies at those hospitals were losing money, and the senior leadership at those areas were actually closing the outpatient pharmacies for that reason and contracting with chain pharmacies to manage that at their campuses.
So, was there investment that was necessary for this adaptation?
No, not really. It was really just knowledge and a minimal investment in FTEs with someone that was really willing to dig into the program and see what was going to happen. The investment came more progressively as we adapted to the program, and now, because of the expensive software and the splitting information and the contract pharmacies and the contract and the compliance and the audit features, we spend millions of dollars a year to keep the program going. But it's something that gives us a big return.
And we must have spent a fair amount of money just to make some of those steps, like the specialty pharmacy. We had to basically acquire space and build it out.
So the initial decision to become part of the 340B program didn't cost money, but the successive business plans that came about because 340B was going to allow us to become more profitable in each area and provide better patient service in each area. Each one of those business plans created a hurdle and cost a lot of money, but has certainly, the amount that we have seen as a return on investment far exceeds the amount of money that we put out.
So, in hindsight, all those decisions were pretty good decisions. But even though you're the manager, now the director of this business unit, were you able to make those decisions on your own, or was there a process of having to convince people that this made sense, and was that process difficult, or was it easy, or was there resistance, or was everyone like, sure, here's the money?
Well, I think that, again, that was gradual. I think the biggest area that we had to push for was the business plan for the specialty pharmacy and the specialty pharmacy drugs and the accreditation that goes along with that, when we initially wanted to increase that because we saw the opportunity that the specialty drugs and the cost of the specialty drugs would have and what the margin was. So initially it was very quiet, and they had faith in us to allow us to run the business and do what we were doing, and so we were profitable but not on their radar. And once we opened the specialty pharmacy and then eventually the contract pharmacy, it became eye-opening because of the revenue we were producing for the organization.
And we had some competitors for a while, right? There was a competing vision for how that specialty pharmacy might work.
Right, so there's more than the vision of specialty pharmacy is ambiguous at best, and there are different models, and there are a number of venture people out there, organizations, pitching their services to senior leadership at hospitals that say they will make that hospital millions of dollars and take a cut in that, but bring it to market in a very short period of time. So the University of Massachusetts did that, and Partners Health, I think, is part of that in the Boston area, and they actually came and avoided the pharmacy leadership and went to the senior leadership to pitch a program. And at the same time, we had been ahead of the curve, and our program was not only going to create revenue but also provide better patient care, keep the information in the medical record, let us reconcile the medical record for everyone. And so we had pitched that to the same leadership as soon as we found out that this other company, Shields, was doing that, and our leadership discussed that and decided that if we did what we did in our business plan and said we would create the volume and the revenue that we had projected, that they were impressed that we were ahead of the curve enough, and that our model, because the pharmacists are actually embedded in the clinics, would provide better patient care, so it wouldn't just be about making or creating a new revenue stream for the institution.
So we had essentially a more complete business plan that involved benefits not just to the institution but to patients, and the competing model was mostly about finances. So did we satisfy the business plan, or did we exceed what the competing company proposed in terms of finances?
Yeah, so we satisfied the business plan. The pharmacists are successfully living in those clinics. The clinicians and the Physicians like the services that we're providing, and we have far exceeded the financial expectations of that business plan at this point.
So you mentioned contract pharmacy, so it might be complicated to explain what that means, but was there some resistance to that model when it was proposed?
Yes. And the resistance was because it was so ambiguous about how we would actually make money from 340B based on the margin of purchasing those drugs when patients were going to get prescriptions filled at community pharmacies but were seen in our institution by our practitioners, and so that made them eligible for 340B. So we had someone who looked at that, and we talked to legal about that, and came up with a plan to start slow with the contract pharmacies. And when we realized that it did work and came up with a replenishing plan, continued to sign contracts with the independents first, and then with some chains, and then with some national specialty pharmacies. So we have gained
we sort of
up to 50 special
started
contract
with
pharmacies.
A local pilot, and we had to convince different levels of leadership that this idea, this concept made sense as a sort of an extension of the business.
Yeah, I think that we had met some resistance to it because people didn't really understand, but we luckily had one of the vice presidents of the institution champion with us based on what our backgrounds were and what our knowledge base was, and his faith, or he was convinced that the plan was solid and that it would work, and so he actually helped pitch that to the senior leaders. So I think that it's important to realize that if it's an ambiguous plan that not everybody's going to understand, or not everybody's going to have their feet in the water for, that at least having a champion at the senior leadership level is important as sort of an entrepreneurial leadership area to get your department to the next level.
All right, so let's see. So the question is, how has the business changed over the last 10 years, and where do you expect it to go in the next 5?
Well, the business has changed from basically just an outpatient pharmacy providing traditional prescription dispensing to patients being discharged, employees, and patients who live in the nearby surrounding Hill District of Burlington, to providing mail order services throughout the state, to having contract pharmacy services throughout the state and nationally, to becoming an accredited specialty pharmacy with URAC, and having the Joint Commission accredit our home infusion services. And we're moving forward with potentially creating an ambulatory infusion site and having a pharmacy associated with that, and moving to a central fill location to provide the services more on a statewide basis, to help a larger population base, and also incorporate the knowledge base that we've gained in pharmacy to the network level with our other hospitals and our affiliates now that are sole community and critical access hospitals, so that we can provide their patients with the same quality of service that we provide our patients with.
So it seems like the pace of change has changed. That the changes in this department, in this business, in the last 5 years are much greater than in the 5 years before that. And maybe from what you're saying, that it'll be even more significant in the next 5 years than it has been in the last 5. So what drives that pace of change? Are we adapting to changes? Are we discovering and trying to take advantage of opportunities? Is it a mixture of those? Are people making demands of us? Is it just sort of organic growth?
I think it's all of the above. I think that technology drives the change, patient care drives the change, healthcare in general is changing, and because of the opportunities that we see out there and the idea that drugs and medication cost as much as they do, and that there's a problem with the opioid crisis, I think that the profession of pharmacy has really sort of been in the mix of change and will be in the mix of change as this current administration in Washington looks at the Accountable Care Act and what we're going to do about the opiate problem and all these other issues that are here. Oh, it's the same. They say it's the same.
Okay. So what role or roles does technology play in all that?
Well, technology currently through apps are giving us reminders to people to take their medication, sending text messages to patients to tell them that their medicine is ready or that they're ready to have a refill. We can check on clinical services to make sure that somebody who might not be compliant is taking their medication and taking care of that on a regular basis without having side effects so that they finish it. We check in with them to make sure that they can afford it or if their copay has changed, and we can actually use the new technology to do card swiping and talk to the patient at bedside about the medication regimen, and so that there's not confusion when they get home, to know that they know how to take their medication and they're consistently able to do that to hopefully prevent unnecessary readmissions to the hospital.
So we have a lot of different technology tools that we use, right? So that sounds like a suite of patient-related technology tools. What about, the tools that we use in the pharmacy to just fill prescriptions? Has that changed a lot in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has changed dramatically. It's all computer-driven. There's software that is a check and double check. There are processes of filling a prescription, from intake and data input and drug utilization review to check drug interactions, are all done by different people who are not necessarily in the same room or in the same exact process of where the patient might see in the pharmacy. So it's created a very different suite of services and expertise that pharmacists and technicians need to be able to do to be successful in the
So
pharmacy.
we distribute work across our business regardless of where the patient actually is encountering the business.
Right.
So you can come to UHC and ask to have a prescription filled, and 2/3 of the work filling that prescription can be done on a different campus.
Right.
And we get data from hospital systems. So in the past, we might have to create new patient profiles and ask the patient for their address and their phone number and ask them about their allergies and their insurance and everything else. And now, if you've been to the hospital, our pharmacy systems have most of that information to begin with.
Right, because our pharmacy system can talk with the Epic system, that is the electronic health record, so it pulls over information based on demographics and allergies and even some diagnosis information from that system to our system, so that we know that that's there, and it allows us to actually check what the patient might have been getting in the hospital when they're discharged, so that we can make sure that those things line up, or that there aren't duplicate medications or dosing issues that happen at that time.
And are there a lot of promising future developments around, maybe integration with other pharmacy data or with other hospital systems or with devices or other ways to interact with patients?
Yeah, I think that data is driving a lot of healthcare, and I think that as we collect data and our systems talk to other systems, specifically systems within our network, that we will have hopefully within the next 5 years developed a network-wide system where we'll be able to provide services to all the patients in our area and in the network, to allow their physicians and patients to be able to see what the medical care, including their prescription needs, are throughout the whole network.
And then maybe with VITL, even have some of that visibility, even if the other hospitals aren't part of our network.
Right.
So, let's see. That's about transformational opportunity as a business owner or manager and entrepreneur. I think we sort of talked about that already. So it says, what businesses do you admire and why? Or a business? I mean, is it Facebook? Is it Snapchat? Is it Patagonia?
Well, I think that over the course of time, we've had this discussion on many times, and the person who was managing here before me was much more of a very structured IBM management type, and I think that the companies that we seem to admire are those companies that have open communication and open conversations, open desk areas where you can share information and produce things together, where you can walk by a desk and have a conversation with somebody to see what they might be working on or thinking that might have an idea for you to get to the next level. And I think that if we could do that and get people out of closed offices and into more of a thinking and cooperative arrangement, much like Facebook or Apple or Patagonia, that we would be good. I think that environmentally, we're in Vermont and we look at always recycling things, and we just started a recycling program for prescription drugs to keep those medications from being flushed down the toilet and ending up in the lake or in our drinking water. And I think that we're always looking for ways to sort of help with that from a standpoint of the health assistance program, with helping people with their medications that they can't afford, and with
So like green and community oriented, and not necessarily like a rigid hierarchy for making decisions, but more of an open and flexible structure.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. So it says, what's the most creative resource that you've taken advantage of in your business?
What's the most creative resource?
Yeah. I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but that's the question.
I think that the most creative resource that we've taken advantage of is the collective culture of the different generations of the people that work here, and what their ideas might be, in order to see how pharmacy might change in the future and what the needs are in the future, because each generation seems to have a different way of communicating and ordering and asking questions and doing things. So our generation might have expected to call on the phone, whereas this generation might want to log into an app, and a next generation is going to want to do something else. And I think that by listening to the different technologies that are associated with the generation and the expertise that that generation has with using them from a daily basis, has really helped our pharmacy grow.
So you might say that, like, if people are a resource, and that conventionally using that resource focuses on, especially in our industry, focuses on credentials and residencies and experience, so how long someone's worked in a particular department, that the creative use of the people resources involved using, not necessarily focusing on seniority and credentials, but looking at people who might have unusual backgrounds or different points of view and perspectives, and then trying to use that as a strength.
Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it says, what's one life lesson you'd like to share? We could skip that one if you think that's too open.
What's one life lesson you'd like to share?
Yeah.
Not to be afraid to take your ideas to leadership, even if leadership is conservative and may not really understand what the ultimate outcome is, if it's going to provide better patient care.
That makes sense. So would you say that, I mean, knowing your understanding of what an entrepreneur is, I know you have some exposure to that, do you think it's possible to be entrepreneurial in an institutional environment? Like, do you think that there's an entrepreneurial angle to what you do, even though you're, sort of a cog in a huge machine?
Yeah, because I think that the profession is what creates the entrepreneurial spirit, and I think that if you're not willing to take risk and to be creative and to make change in your department, that either the department will realize that, or that there'll be other people nationally who are being creative and doing that to create the change at some institutions, that somewhere will be seen to do that. So it's imperative to at least stay ahead of the curve in the profession that you're in, which just makes it, it would be impossible not to communicate and to go to meetings and to see what's happening nationally, and then come up with strategies and plans to see what might happen or might be the best idea to drive that business in both the culture and the demographic of the patients that you have in your geographic area. So
being entrepreneurial is almost an imperative. I mean, essentially, the old model of being a pharmacist and having a pharmacy is at risk of being rendered obsolete. Well, and if you don't adapt to it, then you might be out of a role.
Well, I think that being a pharmacist or being a clinical pharmacist necessarily doesn't have to make you entrepreneurial, but I think that managing and running a pharmacy where there's a business component to it, along with the profession of pharmacy, is where it's important to be entrepreneurial and know what's happening from that business standpoint, because the profession of pharmacy itself is changing, and it's one of the few professions where there's actually a clinical component and a business component to it. So I don't think that if you want to just be a traditional staff pharmacist in a hospital without much actual patient interaction and sit behind a computer all day, that would necessarily impact that situation, and I don't think if you'd like to be a retail pharmacist without managing a retail pharmacy or being responsible for the business side of it, that would actually create or have a need for you to be entrepreneurial.
But those businesses, those really traditional retail businesses like Lakeside down the street or chain pharmacies, I mean, they're at some risk competitively, right? Amazon is talking about getting the pharmacy business. There's huge mail order operations, especially pharmacy operations, that are eating the lunch of those traditional pharmacies, and there are a lot of them we know are struggling even to pay their bills. So is there a chance for those folks that can't adapt or don't have an entrepreneurial desire that, you know, maybe they'll retire and that will be the end of that type of business, or at least it will become irrelevant in the healthcare industry?
Yes.
So it's sort of a, I mean, it's maybe not as clear cut as if you were like competing in the .com world, but you can either adapt and deliver what the pharmacy should look like 5 years from now, or this will be it, and 5 years from now it may not be needed.
That's
or
right.
It might wither.
It's going to wither, because I think that even having a face and a pharmacy and an interaction may end up being, you know, visual or through an app or FaceTime, and there may not be walk-in pharmacies in the future. It may be technology driven with deliveries and conversations in ways that we're not aware of right now, but we can see some people like Amazon already going down that road with the infrastructure they have in place to be able to manage those things.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No.
All right.